my name is Simon McCabe. I'm a senior lecturer in behavioural science here at Aston University, as well as being the head of the Healthy Work Research Unit, and I've been here now for a couple of years. Prior to being here, I was at the Behavioural Science Centre, and I led that for a little bit up at the University of Stirling in Scotland. I am a social psychologist by training. I got my PhD from the University of Missouri, Columbia in 2015. Very good place to study. It's in the middle of nowhere in the United States. And my interest has always been broadly in what's called existential psychology, which is how people respond to the big questions in life. So what makes my life meaningful? Why am I here? What am I doing? Why is it that we are born to live and die? All these kinds of things. It probably won't shock you to learn that, like, as a teenager, I was quite angsty and used to listen to Slipknot and Korn and Limp Bizkit and paint my fingers black.
Similar ilk, I think, in that respect.
Yeah, and so as an undergraduate at the University of Wolverhampton, I stumbled across an article in The Psychologist, which is the publication produced by the British Psychological Society. And it was talking about a theory called terror management theory, which basically posited a lot of human behaviour is driven by our awareness of mortality. So one of the things that separates us from much of the animal kingdom is our capacity for thought, and conscious thought in particular. So, snails don't think, cats don't think, badgers don't think, but humans can. And part of one of the things that we're able to do, relative or different to animals, is we can project ourselves into the future. So we can think about what we're going to do Christmas, where we're going to go on holiday next year, and we can go further and further into the future. The problem is that you come back with some bad news eventually, which is, and by looking around, is that I'm not going to be here forever. And that kind of jives with the biological impulse we have towards life. So while the snail, the cat and the badger don't have the capacity for abstract conscious thought, they do have this natural impulse towards survival. So, they know to fight or flee to preserve themselves, and humans have that too, but it goes against this knowledge that that's ultimately doomed to fail. So how do we solve that problem, right? And the suggestion from terror management theory is that we throw ourselves into meaningful acts, which kind of keeps those death thoughts at bay and allows us to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves that will kind of last into the future, and provides us protection. So that can be in a whole bunch of different cultural endeavours, whether it's starting a family and literally passing on genetic information so you'll survive into the future, whether it's delivering that one lecture that will live on in the minds of students, or writing the fantastic book, or producing the fantastic podcast that's going to have like 1 million listeners or whatever, making your mark in culture that you can put your stamp on and say, that was me, I was here. And that, like I said, provides this protection for people. So that's the background that I was coming from, the theoretical framework that I largely worked with. I originally worked as a psychologist, and I transitioned into a business school. And as a result of that, I started thinking about how this theory applies to more work and business environments. And one of the things that occurred to me was that in addition to sleeping, the other main thing that we spend our time doing is working. And work I would argue, is something that we are naturally inclined towards. Not necessarily our employed work, you might hate your job, but we want to do something with our time and use our talents and our skills to build something, to develop something, to help other people. That's all classed as work. Whether you're tending a garden or delivering a lecture, it all falls into repairing a hole in the wall in your house. That's all work. And it can provide meaning to people's lives, particularly when you think about the average 9-to-5 job. It provides meaning in terms of just the basic structure. So you need to be at a certain place from 9 till 5, and just that ritual of going to the same place, that the very fact that you have structure in your life lays the foundation for meaning. The fact that there is a structure to your life ticks the box that there is some kind of meaning there. But beyond that, at the deeper level, many of our personal relationships sprout or brought up. You meet your best friends, you hang out with work colleagues. Like I said before we started recording, I met my wife.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of people do meet their other halves, don't they, in the workplace, because you spend a third of at least your working life in a workplace. So these are the people that you spend the most time with, really, because, that 8, sometimes 9 hours a day with those people around you. It's probably changed a little bit since COVID, obviously working from home. So how important, with that in mind, is it to sort of keep these relationships going, and how important are the relationships in terms of our work life, and work balance.
Incredibly important. So one of the things that we know from emerging research is that when people retire and they lose access to that social network, is that they struggle immensely. So retirement is associated within the first couple of years of people taking retirement. There's a 40% increase in physical and mental health issues. And part of that is attributed to loneliness and just the fact that people aren't having the social connection is really, really important. As far back as the Greek philosopher Aristotle, he suggested we were social animals. We are naturally want to be with other people, and our work provides that for us.
Is there a gender split? Does it sway more one way than the other? I mean, obviously, a bit like Paul Jones, who's been on this podcast before, from psychology into a business school and doing what he's doing now. Is there a split? Because it seems to me like it would be more aimed at men falling into the category that you almost feel like you lose your self-worth or you've lost your routine, and that impacts men more than it does maybe women.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, men and females hold status, position, jobs, which give them reputation in that sense of that I'm meaningful. However, women are more likely to have taken previous career breaks to raise children. And naturally, women are more flexible in terms of adopting the different roles. And so that previous experience of having not worked, I think, helps them adapt to this transition. The other thing is women are more likely to have friend networks that are outside of the work environment, whereas men tend to have connections that are kind of from school or from work. The other thing that happens as well with this loss of work is that, and the transition from a working life to retirement, for example, and that loss of meaning, which keeps these existential concerns at bay. So they're more likely to rise up, and like a whole host of psychological issues can come from losing work, especially losing work abruptly, like forced redundancy and stuff like that. But even people who take voluntary retirement struggle with some of these issues, loneliness, the existential concerns, all the different kinds of health issues. And slowly, I think that companies and the government are aware that there needs to be put in place kind of transition programs as people move from the working life to retirement. You can't just sort of cut them off and say, okay, you're free now. And I think that people have this misconception that retirement's going to be fantastic. Like, for a good majority of people, they'll have a decent pension. They might have saved up some money. They can go and take that holiday. They all have all this free time to read the book or write the book or do whatever it is that they want to do. But the reality is it's just such a kind of abrupt change. If you think about the key moments in your life that are kind of on this level in terms of transitions, leaving school, school, you have the routine, you have your friendship groups, and then you're suddenly thrown out of that and you have to decide on what you're going to do with the rest of your life. The second one is probably having kids, which is incredibly disruptive in terms of routine. And then the third one...
You said that this morning.
Yes. Yeah, my 1-year-old was up 3 times last night. So if I play anything incoherent, I blame Owen. And then the third thing is retirement, which is kind of like that leaving school thing again. Like, you just sort of said, okay, go and do whatever you want now. And that kind of... there's a fear of freedom effect that we talk about in psychology. There can sometimes be possibility of paralysis. There's just too much to do. It's like if you've ever been scrolling Netflix and you can't choose a film, ramp that up to like 1,000, because now you've got like your whole life to choose what you want to do with it. Not the whole remainder of your life,
sure,
at least. The point I was trying to get to is that industry and government have kind of recognized that dropping people into their retirement is not a great idea. And so they tend to provide what are called exit seminars, which provide people an education on post-work life. But they tend to be focused on things to do with finance, like pension options, and do you want to take a lump sum out, or do you want to spread it over the course of your retirement, etc. It doesn't really address kind of what your life is going to look like on the day-to-day in terms of keeping up social relations, making sure that you have a routine, making sure that you don't just sort of throw yourself into, we joked about going to Spain and drinking tequilas until your days have gone. That's not a good
one way of getting there quicker.
Right, yeah, well, it would accomplish some kind of goal. Definitely, if that's the goal you're looking for. But the other point is that we know from the world of psychology and what's called effective forecasting is that everybody thinks the idea of being retired with, hopefully some bags of money lying around and sitting on a beach drinking cocktails for the rest of your life is great. And then when you actually do it, by the time like you're in your second week, you realize that this is not what you expected, and you wanted to be doing more meaningful stuff with your work.
I think it's really interesting. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I don't know if this clip has been doing the rounds, but they were talking about what the average amount of time is for somebody to be drawing on their pension. Now, I don't know if you would know the answer to that. I know what the stat was on the podcast, and it surprised me because the average is 8 years. So we're always taught, especially sort of our generation, of put it into a pension. It's the most tax efficient way to build wealth. And on the other hand, we've got what is on average looking like 8 years to make the most of it. And we were talking about, obviously you were talking about existential thoughts through this podcast. I mean, does that come into play as well? The amount of time that people are actually drawing on that pension or using those savings, spending the money that they built up because of that what is essentially quite a short period of time.
Yeah. I think that a lot of insight for that kind of stuff came from the pandemic, where we saw people taking early retirement because they could financially afford to, especially people who are wealthier could afford to do so. It's caused all kinds of problems in terms of generational wealth. And so, there's a lot of problems with the economy at the moment, particularly for younger folks and getting on the housing ladder, because a lot of the wealth is caught up in these older generations. But one thing we learned, to get to your question, is that the pandemic was kind of like a mass mortality reminder for like over a year. People were just bombarded with messages about death. And one of the things that we saw was it sort of brought people in line or gave them a reality check of, what am I doing with my life? And they realized they didn't want to be working for a corporation and spending all their time, fundamentally lining the pockets of somebody else. And so they left to pursue their own endeavors as they were free to do, if that's what they wanted to do, but it caused big problems for the economy. So we've got big gaps in the labour market now because of what's called the mass resignation. So one of the studies that we're doing here as part of the Healthy Work Research Unit is trying to figure out how can we attract those people back into the workplace if they should want to. And one thing that you can do is to simply change the way that jobs are advertised. So many of these people who left the workforce are relatively well off financially. So saying, we're going to pay you this much money and you'll have an office and the company car and all these material benefits, we predicted would be unlikely to be a big draw.
Sorry to interrupt, but what do you mean by financially well off? Is there a barometer? Is there a scale for that? And then that you go, actually, that level is, we will class for the purposes of this research as well off. Anything above that is very well off. Below that is what the average. Below that is poor.
No, so we didn't look at it that way. We just took people who had taken early retirement. So at the age of 55, I think between the ages of 55 and 60. So I think the state pension is something like 67.
I think it is now.
So if you were able to retire between the ages of 55 and 60, the assumption is you're financially well enough.
Yeah.
To do
right.
so.
I see. Yeah. That makes sense.
We didn't actually, ask how much do you have.
Yeah.
We inferred it from the fact that they were able to retire at, whatever it was, 12 years earlier than state pension age. So the study looked at the job advertisements focused on kind of attracting people by highlighting materialistic elements like the salary, the company car, the nice office, all that. Or in a second condition, we had these people who were over the age of 55 look at jobs that framed the role as involving nurturing the future generations and contributing to upskilling workers and passing on your skills and your expertise as kind of generating a legacy. And so one of the things that I mentioned at the very start of this program was that sense of passing something on or leaving a mark is really important in terms of combating these existential concerns. If you feel like you're continuing to contribute to the world or, pour your expertise into other people's lives, that can go a long way to quieting those death thoughts and making you feel like I'm still a healthy, contributing, productive member of society. So if you frame a job as giving you that opportunity, what we saw was people were way more interested in learning more about that job. Not only were they more interested in learning about it, we had a situation where we provided a link and we said, this job is currently available. If you would like to look at the further responsibilities, etc., you can click it. And what we saw was more click-throughs when it was framed as a job that offered this ability to contribute to future generations as something bigger than themselves, rather than simply saying, here's a load of cash in your office and all the materialistic stuff.
Yeah. That's why with perfect storm, I guess, of people who have got to the end of that 2-3 week hump of everything being brilliant because you can do what you want and spend money on whatever you like. I know we've mentioned beaches and cocktails quite a lot in this podcast episode, but I suppose whatever you're doing, it becomes maybe a little bit more monotonous than it otherwise would be, and can't really be comparable to the world of work, because ideally there's something happening different every day. I suppose if you're in the garden, there's only so many times you can mow the grass or tend to the roses. But no, I think that's really interesting. And have you seen the attitudes change for good, or do you think it's just a hangover from the pandemic and people are becoming sort of more used to the new norm, as we coined it then, of working from home, maybe seeing different groups of people, that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really big question. I don't think that I can really inform it kind of beyond my own gut level instinct, which is I do think something fundamental has changed in society. And I was teaching this morning a couple of seminars with undergraduates, and they just don't seem to be as into the idea of working and gaining money, particularly, speaking specifically about the UK context at the moment. It's pretty dire. You would be working to get by, and they're sort of clued into that, and they're keenly aware that it's not what the system isn't working.
Well, these undergraduates were born in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
So they've had in their lifetime, when they're extremely young, a global financial crisis, a change in UK government, and the 14 years that followed that of essentially no growth, leaving the European Union obviously in there as well, COVID, all of these things. So actually, if you take their life that they live now up until 18, not much good's happened.
No, and I think that they're so clued in and intelligent about this stuff. I mean, like, there are only a handful of countries that you can point to where the economy has continued to grow.
Yeah.
The very cornerstone of capitalism is based on continuous growth, and that's just impossible with finite resources. And so the UK, is stagnating. The US is doing okay, but mostly benefiting the people at the top of the ladder, not your everyday Joe. And it's not hard. It's really easy to sympathise with younger people saying there's got to be a different way. So I think that the way that they're going to have to fill these existential questions of what am I going to do with their life, what am I going to do with my life, is they do tend to be more, they're gravitating towards not-for-profit organisations, things that make a positive impact on the world, in
sustainability,
stuff like that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, because they can say, I was part of this movement that helped protect the planet, which is a huge way to say that, I did something meaningful with my life, rather than I managed to get my bank account numbers to go up over the last 40 years.
That's really, really interesting. I suppose actually just because something is in sustainability or helping people doesn't mean that it can't be lucrative either. Do they maybe think about it a little bit differently, that you don't have to be part of the rat race, you can all just be a little bit kinder, I suppose, without...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know about whether... I mean, money is always going to be important. Everybody pokes the holes in capitalism, and like I just did it just now, and so it's what is the alternative, and that's like you need someone above my pay grade to answer those kinds of questions. But yeah, I don't remember what the second part of your question is. I just think that they are faced with unique and distinct existential concerns that people like myself and you and previous generations, they're faced with a unique set of scenarios and questions that we will not necessarily have to encounter in that way.
And just finally, before we wrap up, what is it that makes you tick? What is it that makes you get up in the morning, and what sort of puts off those death thoughts for you?
Mm-hmm.
I imagine children comes into
absolutely, yeah. So I used to be 100% honest and pour my heart out. Like, I used to be a career academic. I was interested in becoming a professor. Mm-hmm. I was born in King's Standing, and I guess I was never supposed to be here, has always been my thought as a senior lecturer in behavioural science. And so I put all my eggs in that basket, right? And I thought, I'm really going to, I've been given this chance. I luckily managed to make it and go all the way to the top as a professor. And then we had our kids, And it was like a slap in the face of like, what are you doing? Like spending all of your time in the office chasing money. Like you've got enough stuff. Like what will having like the slightly bigger house or the fancier car do for you? And you realize that there's people more important than yourself, particularly, when they're young and defenseless and you think this person needs money, you realize that your job is not to make the bank balance go up, is to make sure that other people around you are happier and healthier and that you can give to other people because they give to you as well, right? So yeah, I feel like it was kind of a moment in a film where there was this kind of like huge development of plot twist of like character redemption arc, something.
I like that. Yeah,
like the evil banker like turns into the philanthropist.
I mean, it's still Scrooge at the end of Christmas Carol.
Exactly. Yeah. So kids is a huge one, and I think there's the study that I was mentioning before about job advertisements focused on contributing to the future versus materialistic benefits. The technical term is called generativity for that focus, and we know that as people get older, so Hans Eysenck was a big developmental psychologist who focused on this. People naturally value more contributing to the future, and I think kids are a catalyst for that. They make you realize. The way that I saw it posted on a social media post the other day was like, you no longer are the main character; you're just a really good supporting role now, and I'm fine with that. Right? You sort of like. I remember lamenting to my wife, like over a period of 2 or 3 years. Like,
great word.
That, like, I feel like the world isn't about me anymore, and it was really unsettling and I hated it. Like all the music used to be geared towards me, like all the films and stuff, and now I feel like I've been left behind. Like what? It's not for me anymore.
It doesn't help, Simon, when bands that we would have listened to growing up are now called dad rock.
Right, exactly.
Do you know? Yeah, so I totally feel your pain on that one.
Yeah. But I definitely have first-hand experience of this kind of generative switch and focusing more, like it's not about me anymore. It's how can I put the future and the future generations and the world in a better place so that they can do their thing.
So go on, how can we find out more about the research that's going on, and anybody out there that may be listening to that and going, oh, I just fancy getting involved and doing something with Simon?
Yep. So we have the Twitter account. So if you just Google Healthy Work Research Unit on Twitter or X, Google Healthy Work Research Unit Aston University, you'll find our landing page with directions to this podcast, the video recordings, all the different members of staff associated with the unit. We've got a bunch of people doing really interesting stuff. So yeah, you can find us online in all sorts of places.
And we've got a couple of guests coming up. Do you want to just give a little bit of a quick overview of the next guest on the podcast?
Yep, we have Dr. Isabella Moore, who earned her PhD here at Aston University. She is an entrepreneur. She has run a couple of companies. The first one is a translations company, and the second one is looking at entrepreneurship for older people, so over the age of 55. So very relative to what we've been speaking about today, those people who take that retirement and they think, I don't want to, disappear into the sunset just yet. Got some money lying around, let's start a company. I've got all this expertise, got this network, so why not? So it should be really good to have her here and hear her thoughts.
That sounds like a really interesting episode and sort of ticking all of those boxes as well of theory versus practice and reality, isn't it? That's really important. Perfect. Do you want to wrap things up for us? Say goodbye?
Yep. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Please do continue to tune in, look us up, and thank you for listening.